Hey everyone, today we are diving into a genuinely fascinating and frankly incredibly powerful piece of ancient text, Prophets Isaiah, chapter 5. We're going to conduct a strict step-by-step study of this entire chapter, starting right from the famous parable of the vineyard, moving through the very specific 6 woes of the people, and going all the way to the chilling final judgment of an invading army. We'll be decoding the plain meaning of the text, verse by verse, so we can see exactly what the prophet was communicating directly to his audience.
Welcome to the Pardes channel. Today, we explain Prophets Isaiah chapter 5 in a clear and simple way, step by step. So here is our roadmap for this explainer. First, the context of the vineyard. Second, our step-by-step walkthrough. Third, clarifying the text. Fourth, key simple ideas. Fifth, practical life lessons. And finally, number 6, our chapter recap and conclusion. All right, let's jump right into section 1, context of the vineyard. So to set the stage, the text explicitly tells us that Isaiah is addressing the inhabitants of Jerusalem and the men of Judah. He's speaking directly to his contemporaries, his own people, and he begins with this really captivating parable about agriculture. Now remember, in an agrarian society, literally everyone understood how a vineyard worked. They knew the immense, backbreaking labor required to cultivate one. By framing his message this way, Isaiah ensures that everyone listening can perfectly grasp the plain meaning of his story before he pivots to confront them with their specific societal sins. It's a brilliant setup. Moving right along to section 2, our step-by-step walkthrough. Let's break down the text. We start off with verses 1 through 4. The caretaker of this vineyard did absolutely everything right. The soil was perfectly prepared, the absolute best vines were planted, and it was heavily protected. But inexplicably, instead of good grapes, it brought forth wild, bitter grapes. The caretaker then turns to the men of Judah, practically inviting them to be the jury, and asks this powerful rhetorical question: what could have been done more to my vineyard that I have not done in it? It's a mic drop moment. He proves that he provided absolutely everything necessary for success, completely removing any possible excuse for why the vineyard failed. Well, because the vineyard failed so miserably, verses 5 through 7 lay out the inevitable judgment. The caretaker announces that he's going to take away the hedge and completely break down the fence. The judgment here is the total removal of the vineyard's protection. Left entirely exposed to the elements, it's naturally going to be eaten up and trodden down. And then, in verse 7, Isaiah just drops the metaphor completely. Bam! He tells them straight up, the vineyard is the house of Israel, and the men of Judah are the pleasant plant. God looked for justice from them, but found only oppression. This brings us to the core of the chapter. You might be wondering, what exactly were these wild grapes? Verses 8 through 17 answer this by detailing the first of 6 specific woes or sins committed by the people. First up, Isaiah calls out their greed. People hoarding houses and fields until there is literally no room left for anyone else. Next, he condemns this endless revelry. You have people chasing intoxicating drinks from early morning deep into the night, completely ignoring God's deeds. And as a direct consequence of this behavior, Isaiah warns that these glorious partying masses will soon suffer from exile, famine, and intense thirst. The tragic disconnect just continues as we move into verses 18 through 23. Here, Isaiah targets deceit and sheer arrogance. He describes people who drag their sins along openly, mocking God to act. He utterly condemns those who twist reality, the people calling evil good and good evil. Finally, he calls out the corrupt leaders who take bribes to justify the wicked, all while stripping the innocent of their rights. So instead of the expected yield of justice and righteousness, the actual harvest of this society was this staggering, heavy list of corruption. And because of these specific, unyielding sins, verses 24 through 30 outline the terrifying final consequence. First, just as fire consumes dry stubble, their metaphorical roots will turn to rot because they completely despise the law. Second, physical destruction arrives, making the very mountains tremble. Finally, and definitely most devastatingly, God summons an invading army from afar. Isaiah describes this nation as swift, untiring, with sharpened arrows, roaring like lions as they seize their prey. The chapter ends with this dark, truly suffocating picture of this army taking over the land. Let's transition to section 3, clarifying the text. The absolute most crucial point here is defining what this vineyard actually is. Isaiah is not just giving his audience an ancient farming lesson, right? The vineyard is a direct metaphor representing the inhabitants of Jerusalem and the men of Judah. When the caretaker asked the men of Judah to judge the vineyard, he was actually tricking them into judging themselves. God is the caretaker,
and the people of Israel are the vineyard he personally planted, expertly cultivated, and fiercely protected.
So if the vineyard represents the people, then the wild grapes represent the massively disappointing yield of their actions. Instead of producing the good grapes of justice and obedience to the laws they were given, they yielded those 6 woes we just covered: the greed, the drunkenness, the arrogance, and the deep corruption. The wild grapes are the physical manifestation of their moral and spiritual failure, despite having every possible advantage. We have a tragic disconnect at the very heart of this chapter. On one side of the equation, we have the caretaker's work. That's God's perfect cultivation, his laws, and his immense protection. On the other side, we have the vineyard's yield, the bitter rebellion and specific sins of the people. Because the setup was flawless, the people absolutely cannot blame their circumstances. They can only blame their own choices, which, in the context of the text, fully justifies the devastating invasion that follows.
Okay, let's distill this down in section 4, key simple ideas. Here is the core dynamic of Isaiah chapter 5 summarized simply. First, God provided perfectly for the vineyard, giving the people an absolute rock-solid foundation for success. Second, despite this perfect setup, the people yielded wild grapes through active rebellion and societal injustice. And third, actions have consequences. Because of their continuous, unrepentant sin, divine protection is systematically withdrawn, and a relentless invading army is summoned as their ultimate judgment. Let's bring this home to our own lives in section 5, practical life lessons. First off, just like that vineyard, you and I have to recognize that we've been given the tools we need to succeed. We all have cultivated spaces in different aspects of our lives. Second, because of that, we have a duty to honestly examine our fruit. We have to ask ourselves, are we producing kindness and integrity, or are we falling into those modern woes of selfishness, greed, and arrogance? Finally, this text teaches deep accountability. Ultimately, we are absolutely responsible for what we produce with the gifts and the protections we've been given. Finally, section 6, chapter recap and conclusion. As we zoom out, we can see how this chapter builds a beautifully structured yet totally tragic chronological arc. Step 1 is the perfect cultivation, where everything is generously provided. Step 2 is the unexpected rebellion, detailed clearly by the 6 specific woes. Step 3 establishes total accountability, proving beyond a doubt that the caretaker did everything possible. And finally, step 4 is the unavoidable judgment, ending with the terrifying approach of that swift invading army. This logical flow proves the tragic outcome wasn't arbitrary. It was entirely justified by the plain facts of the case. As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a final provocative thought. What kind of fruit are you producing with the protection and tools you have been given? Isaiah asked the men of Judah to judge themselves based on their actions, and today, this ancient text reaches right through history to ask us to do the exact same thing. Take a moment, look at your life, and honestly evaluate your harvest. Thank you for learning with us. If this helped you understand the chapter better, like, subscribe, and join us for the next chapter.